Alyssa Silverman. I'm one of the at-large DC council members, which means I represent the entire city. I'm one of the two independent party members, and I have been a district resident since the mid-90s. When I became a district resident and realized in my 20s that I didn't have congressional representation, I grew up in just an hour away in Baltimore, and my father commuted every day to the district. So even as a kid, I had a connection to the district. But when I moved here and realized that I didn't have a full vote and voice in Congress, statehood became an issue. I just think it's a civil rights issue. We are American citizens. We live in the district, we pay taxes just like other Americans do. We go to war, send our children to war just like other Americans do. And I think we should have all the full rights and privileges of being a American citizen, which is having a voice, a full voice in our federal legislature.
Councilmember Robert White, an at-large member of the DC Council. Statehood has been an issue for me since I was born. It's been an issue that I've worked on really almost since I graduated from law school. I worked for about 5 years for Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, and one of the first things that I took over when I joined her office was the DC Statehood portfolio. That was a time when President Obama had just been elected, when Democrats won both the House and the Senate. And so it was an exciting time for DC residents, feeling like we were one step closer to autonomy, one step closer to equal rights and equal liberties with the rest of the country. I think the primary hurdle for statehood is how many people don't understand the issue. The first thing that I learned, and this is surprising to me as somebody who grew up in DC, is that most people outside of DC don't realize that DC is not a state. Don't you realize the uniqueness of the District of Columbia? And as people do understand that, they start to think that DC is similar to the territories, like Puerto Rico, like Guam, like the Virgin Islands. But DC is not like them. DC is very unique. We are the only jurisdiction that pays federal taxes that are governed entirely by the federal government in combination with our local government that do not have the full rights of citizenship as defined in our Constitution. As I talk to people one-on-one, I can convince people of the necessity often to make DC a state. But a one-by-one campaign is not going to get us there. We really have to mobilize in a broad way. We have to activate the hundreds of thousands of DC residents, and we have to have a broad information campaign across the country. But there are a lot of challenges, and so we have to keep pushing.
My name is Brianne Nadeau, and I am the DC Council member representing Ward 1. I think I've been working on statehood since before I was elected because I've lived in the District of Columbia for 17 years. And moving here, I had to give up voting rights from my home state of Michigan. And so, there's two issues here is, there are Native Washingtonians who've never had anywhere else that they've lived and they've never been represented. And there are people who come to build a life here who are actually giving up their rights to do so because they're not fully represented. So I've been a part of that fight longer than I can remember. Didn't change my voter registration right away because I knew that my vote would make a difference in some of the elections in Michigan. I was still connected there. It was a really big deal to me when I changed over. I think I was really mindful of what I was giving up, but also wanted to feel very committed to the community that I lived in, that I'm building a life in. And we really live and die by our local elections because we don't have any representation federally. And so as a local leader, I'm glad for that. I'm glad that people realize how important local elections are, but I also want for my constituents to have representation that everyone else in this country has. I try to connect the dots for them around the bigger issues. In my mind, one of the big issues that I can't solve for them is gun violence. There is nobody that they can vote for that can cast a vote on the House or Senate floor that represents their views on gun violence prevention. When we have states on either side of us that have such lax laws, we have some of the strongest gun violence prevention laws in the country, but it doesn't make a difference because we can't get our federal government to do what it needs to do to keep us safe. The same thing is with immigration. We have a federal government that is attacking our own residents, my constituents, being detained, deported by federal leaders that we did not elect. And so those are things that weigh on me that I try to explain to my constituents. You know, as an elected leader myself, as a duly elected official, the decisions that I make on behalf of the people who elected me can be overturned on a whim by someone that they never cast a vote for in Congress. And that happens